Let's talk a little bit about inflation. We have a bit of data here. When people have seen the headline numbers, I think we've got to dissect inflation. And so I'm going to just throw some numbers on the screen here about what's driving inflation. And we'll just talk about this briefly, and then we'll pull the data off the screen. People will be able to get it from us later. But you got a headline number that is over 8%. 42% of that comes from food and energy. We've circled a few numbers in that far right column there. The food, the energy numbers, the used car number, and the shelter number. And I think people ought to consider which of these is transitory, which of these is persistent. And it's, I think, reasonable to think that food actually could go up even more because of the war impact, and people do need to eat. It's almost not a matter of price. Energy could go either way. I think oil at its current level it's called a long-term unsustainable high, but short-term it could go up quite a bit. So that's highly unpredictable in terms of direction. But then you have some other items that are very unlikely to be persistent. Used cars are not going to keep on going up at 35% a year. I don't think anyone in the world would expect that. And when it comes to shelter, maybe that's just driven by low interest rates and liquidity that, of course, is no longer going that same direction. The low interest rates are gone. The liquidity is being pulled. So that number is unlikely to continue. So I think when people actually dissect inflation, they might realize that some of it is structurally transitory and some of it is unpredictable. So our view is that you got to look under the hood for inflation. Let's look at the next slide. It shows us the forecasts. What's really interesting is the forecasts pulled out of Bloomberg are all converging at a number sort of between 2 and 3. And this is the expected inflation level run rate as of year end 2023. So that's enough about the inflation data. We can pull the slides off the screen here. I mean, you talk to a lot of people on the product side and the asset allocation side, et cetera. What do you feel investors are thinking about inflation, and what are they doing about it?
Yeah, I think the word transitory itself now became a bad word. So I think everybody was disappointed that it turned out not to be. The question now is how persistent it actually is. And I totally agree. I think looking under what is actually driving inflation, I mean, some of the food, the cars, to your point, vehicles, that kind of stuff, in theory, it's supply chain stuff. So it should not be persistent if we can fix, the supply chain. Now, just yesterday, I saw this statistic about the actual shipping routes between Asia and the US. That trip is still twice as long as it was in 2019, right before the pandemic. So it has alleviated a little bit from what it was just recently in January. But it's still taking a long time to get supplies shipped from one place to the other. But that's not a structural thing. I think it's a temporary thing. And so it could alleviate. And, a 2% inflation target 12 months from now, 18 months from now, doesn't sound that bad to me, actually. Sounds pretty livable with. So I guess maybe we'll go back to transitory. I don't know, Connor. I'll leave that word to you.
Well, I think on that choice of words way back when, nobody had a war in mind.
Yeah, true.
And then the more recent surprise is the shutdowns in China. So you got Shanghai and maybe Beijing going under lockdown. That's going to cause the supply chain disruption to persist for a while. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's a very long transitory period, if that's what it is.
The longest transition in history, yes.
Yeah, exactly.